In a quiet town, something shocking happened. A young man said a dark force controlled him. The judge said that was impossible. The family said they saw the darkness move with their own eyes. And the truth tore their lives apart. What you are about to hear is not a movie. It is not a story someone made up. This really happened. And the deeper you go, the stranger it becomes. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the full story. In the summer of 1980, in Brookfield, Connecticut, a quiet town where life moved slowly, a family began noticing something unusual. An 11-year-old boy named David Glatzel started acting in ways that unsettled everyone around him. At first, his sister Debbie and her fiancé, Arne Johnson, thought he was simply upset or stressed from helping out. David had been assisting them with cleaning a rental house they planned to move into. That was when he said he saw an old man threaten the family. No one else saw this figure, but David described him repeatedly and with conviction. Soon, David began having intense nightmares and night terrors. He would wake up crying, shouting, or speaking in ways that were unfamiliar to his family. His behavior changed dramatically, and his parents first sought help from doctors. Some professionals suggested possible psychological or neurological explanations, but nothing seemed to fully explain the experiences. The family sensed that something deeper was at play. As the weeks passed, David became withdrawn and fearful, often reluctant to be alone. Everyday routines grew difficult. Meals, schoolwork, and simple interactions became tense. Friends and neighbors noticed the changes, and concern grew within the community. Desperate for answers, the family reached out to local Catholic clergy. Prayers and blessings were performed, yet the unusual episodes persisted. Ordinary solutions were not enough. That's when Ed and Lorraine Warren, well-known paranormal investigators, were called in. The Warrens reported witnessing episodes where David appeared to act in ways that were not typical for him. They said that a series of rites were performed by priests to try and resolve whatever was affecting him. During these sessions, a dramatic moment reportedly occurred. Arne, who had been close to the family, shouted for the presence to leave David and take him instead. After this, the family said David's episodes began to ease. However, Arne himself began showing unusual behavior. Friends and relatives described him as distant, trance-like, or sometimes unusually agitated. No one outside the family can fully know what happened. But what is certain is that the ordinary life of a young family in Brookfield had been disrupted by events that could not be explained. Within months, what started as a child's frightening experiences would escalate, eventually drawing the attention of the town and leaving questions that would linger for years. As David's episodes began to calm, a new and troubling story started to take shape. Witnesses later reported that during one of the intense rituals, a dark presence seemed to shift. They claimed that Arne, his sister's fiancé, had challenged the force to leave David and enter him instead. After that moment, Arne began acting in ways that seemed completely out of character. Those closest to him noticed that he sometimes appeared distant, staring blankly for long periods. At other times, he spoke or moved in ways that were unsettling. Friends and family described him as unusually aggressive, even in situations that would normally be calm or ordinary. The Warrens, who had been observing the family and performing their rituals, recorded what they described as alarming evidence of this new influence. According to their accounts, Arne's behaviors mirrored some of the disturbing actions David had displayed. Yet, not everyone in the family agreed with this interpretation. Some were skeptical. They wondered if the stress of living with a frightened child, combined with the pressure of daily life, could explain Arne's sudden changes. Others worried that fear and tension had amplified ordinary reactions into something that seemed unnatural. Despite the disagreements, the tension in the household grew. Every sound, every sudden movement, every unexplained action seemed magnified. The family's home, once a place of safety, now felt unpredictable and heavy with fear. Meals became quiet and tense. Conversations were careful because no one knew what might trigger an outburst. The small Brookfield community began to notice subtle changes too. Friends and neighbors spoke quietly about odd events at the Glatzel home. Some reported seeing Arne behave strangely in public. Others noticed that David's presence had changed the household dynamic, creating stress and unease that spilled over into the surrounding neighborhood. During this period, the family continued to seek help from clergy. Priests performed blessings and prayers, attempting to restore calm and safety. The Warrens maintained a presence in the home, documenting what they saw and advising the family on what they believed was a spiritual crisis. Yet, no matter what was done, a sense of dread remained. The ordinary routines of life, work, school, chores, were overshadowed by the uncertainty of what might happen next. This growing unease did not stay confined to the family. Stories of the strange behaviors, whispered warnings, and fearful speculation spread through Brookfield. The household was no longer just a private matter. It had become a story that neighbors could not ignore. Everyone wondered, what was happening inside that home? Could ordinary explanations account for everything they were seeing, or was there something truly extraordinary at work? Within weeks, what began as a child's disturbing episodes had spread in ways no one could fully predict. The tension, the fear, and the reports of strange behaviors built steadily, creating a charged atmosphere that would soon lead to an event that shocked the entire town. The ordinary lives of these young adults and their families were being pulled into a story far larger than themselves, one that would eventually make national headlines. In early February of 1981, the tension around the Glatzel family and Arne Johnson had reached a peak. The unusual behaviors continued, and the household remained uneasy. Arne's friends and family noticed that he seemed different. Sometimes he would stare silently for long periods. At other times, he would become agitated over small matters. Even Debbie, his fiancée, could see that something had changed. The normal routines of life felt impossible to maintain. Every day carried a quiet weight of fear. During this time, Arne continued to work at a local kennel. He cared for animals, but even there his behavior drew attention. Coworkers said he seemed distracted or tense. He occasionally displayed sudden bursts of anger that were out of character. Meanwhile, the Glatzel family did what they could to support him and keep the household calm. They prayed, they spoke softly, and they tried to avoid anything that might trigger conflict. Yet, the sense of unpredictability remained. On February 16, 1981, what had been building for months came to a tragic head. Alan Bono, a 40-year-old man who was Debbie's employer and landlord, had spent the day drinking. Later, he arrived at the kennel where Debbie worked. Accounts from that day indicate that tensions rose quickly. Bono reportedly became agitated and grabbed a young relative, which sparked an argument with Arne. Friends present later described the scene as tense and frightening. Words were exchanged. Voices were raised. Tempers flared. Witnesses said that Arne, who had already been under immense stress for weeks, reacted suddenly. He pulled a pocket knife and stabbed Bono. The attack was over in moments. Emergency services were called, and Bono was taken to a hospital, where he later died from his injuries. Arne was arrested at the scene, a short distance from the kennel. He said afterward that he did not remember the events clearly. He appeared confused and shaken. The quiet town of Brookfield, which had seen very little violent crime, was stunned. Almost immediately, the case drew attention beyond the local police. News crews arrived. Reporters learned that Arne had previously been involved in unusual events with the Glatzel family. Some accounts began circulating that linked the stabbing to the strange behaviors that had been observed in the months before. It was reported that Arne had claimed at times that a dark force had influenced him. Lorraine Warren, who had been involved with the family, stated publicly that she believed the same force that had tormented David had entered Arne. The claim shocked the community. For many, the idea that a violent act could be blamed on supernatural influence was hard to accept. Police and prosecutors focused on the facts. A man had died, and Arne had been present and involved in the attack. The extraordinary claims were noted, but in court, they would later be deemed inadmissible. Still, for the people who had witnessed the events leading up to that day, and for the family involved, the reality of what had happened was complex. Fear, stress, and extraordinary claims were all tangled together. What started as a child's terrifying experiences had now led to a fatal confrontation. A town that had been calm and ordinary was now at the center of a story that would make national headlines. Families, neighbors, and friends were left to wonder how events that seemed supernatural or unexplainable could intersect with reality in such a devastating way. The quiet streets of Brookfield were now filled with questions. The story of Arne Johnson and the Glatzel family was far from over. The arrest of Arne Johnson set the stage for a trial that would captivate the nation. From the very beginning, the case was unlike anything the court had seen before. Johnson's attorneys considered presenting an unusual defense. They explored the claim that a dark force had influenced his actions on the day of the killing. At the time, this idea made headlines around the country. Newspapers described it as the first U.S. case in which someone might claim demonic possession as a reason for committing a crime. When the trial began, the courtroom was tense. Reporters filled the galleries. Cameras and microphones were everywhere. Lawyers attempted to introduce evidence that suggested Arne's actions were affected by supernatural forces. The judge, however, rejected this argument. He ruled that supernatural claims could not be proven or measured in court. The legal system demanded evidence that could be tested and examined. Claims of possession, he decided, did not meet that standard. Faced with this decision, the defense shifted to more conventional arguments. They suggested that Arne had acted without full intent and in a state of fear or confusion. Witnesses were called to describe the events leading up to the killing. Family members, co-workers, and neighbors provided testimony about Arne's behavior in the weeks before the incident. Some described him as troubled or distracted. Others recalled sudden bursts of anger. The prosecution focused on the facts. A man had been stabbed, and Arne was present. His actions had caused the death of Alan Bono. The jury deliberated for hours. Each member had to consider whether Arne's actions were intentional and whether the law could excuse them under the circumstances. After careful consideration, they returned a verdict of guilty of first-degree manslaughter. Johnson was sentenced to a term of 10 to 20 years in prison. Later accounts indicate that he served about 5 years before being released on good behavior. During his time in prison, he continued his education and maintained contact with his family. After his release, he married David Glatzel, and together they built a family and a life outside of Brookfield. Even after the trial, the story did not fade from public attention. Books, interviews, and media reports explored the events leading up to the killing, the arrest, and the trial. Lorraine Warren continued to defend the idea that a malevolent force had influenced Arne. Others, including members of the Glatzel family, disputed parts of that narrative. They suggested that psychological, environmental, or social factors might explain the unusual behaviors observed before the incident. The case became a cultural touchstone. It highlighted the tension between belief and evidence, between personal experience and the standards of the law. The trial demonstrated that extraordinary claims, even when deeply held, cannot substitute for legal proof. Yet the fascination with the story remained. Documentaries, feature films, and articles continued to examine the case decades later. People were drawn not only to the facts, but also to the mystery that surrounded the family, the young man, and the tragic events of February 16, 1981. Brookfield, once a quiet and unremarkable town, became forever linked to this case. The trial, the claims, and the conflicting memories raise questions that have never been fully resolved. How do we explain behaviors that seem impossible to understand? How does the law respond when extraordinary claims intersect with real-life tragedy? The story of Arne Johnson and the Glatzel family shows that reality can sometimes be stranger than fiction, and that human experience often defies easy explanation. The events in Brookfield left a lasting mark on everyone involved. A young boy's terrifying experiences, a tragic killing, and a courtroom unlike any before it created a story that would never be forgotten. For some, the case remains a mystery. For others, it is a reminder of how fear, stress, and extraordinary claims can collide in real life. Decades later, people still ask the same questions. What really happened in that house? Was there something supernatural at work, or were the events the result of ordinary human behavior under extreme stress? No one outside the family and those present at the time can know the full truth. What is known is that a town once quiet and peaceful was changed forever. The story also reminds us of the limits of the legal system. Claims of possession and supernatural influence could not be used in court. The law demanded evidence that could be proven. Yet, the fascination with the story continues. Books, documentaries, and films keep the case alive, showing that some events linger in the public imagination far longer than we expect. In the end, the tale of Brookfield is more than a tragedy. It is a story about belief, fear, and the extraordinary ways human lives can be affected by events that seem beyond understanding. It is a story that challenges what we accept as reality and asks us to consider the boundaries between the ordinary and the inexplicable. The lives of David Glatzel, Arne Johnson, and the families involved moved forward. But the memory of those events remains, a chilling reminder that sometimes truth is stranger and more unsettling than fiction.